Before we get started on today's video, I just wanted to remind you that The Arc of Angels, the sequel to Gift of the Mancynns, second book in the actual Ragnarök Chronicles franchise, is coming out this Saturday. There will be a live stream at midday GMT. Tune into that if you want to hear extracts from the books, as well as get involved with some discussions around some wider stuff, or whatever it is you guys want to talk about. And regardless, even if not, it will be available on paperback and ebook from Amazon, as Gift of the Mancynns was, as is currently linked in the description below. If you're seeing this later, Arc of Angels will also be in the description below, but yes, be sure to check that out. And if you haven't read the first book yet, Gift of the Mancynns, why not have that a go now as well? Take the opportunity in readiness for book 2. In the videos on the channel so far, I have in some cases discussed the nature of the multiverse within which my books are set. However, as well as having things that originate from other planes and dimensions than the one we exist in, the Alpha Realm, we can actually go even further, to beyond the limits of our own multiverse, to find other multiverses in turn distinct, elsewhere even further beyond in whatever the even grander term for reality would be. And while for the most part we don't get to see what those other multiverses are, there are some instances of some peoples or individuals who we do run across all the same, and it's them that we're going to be discussing in this video. Hello and welcome to the Ragnarök Chronicles. My name is Dominic, and this is the channel where I just talk to you about some of the aspects of the lore in the books that I am writing. Now, when discussing the concept of travelling between different multiverses in general, the main obstacle is just transportation. Just literally, how would you span the void between, these two larger clusters of reality? Even we talk about the void of space, such as in the Alpha Realm, our plane of existence that is just a part of our multiverse, that still actually has some reality in it, in that you have the underlying kind of layer of reality, the Ziangg, which also houses the algorithm that determines the nature of the universe. But no, beyond the outer region, or the beta realm in our cases, there is a perfect void. There is absolutely nothing to bridge the gaps between against the other multiverse. So you would need to have some kind of vessel that would permit transport over such a vast distance of pure nothingness. But let's say that you do have that sort of technology. When it then comes to entering the multiverse, at least in the case of entering our multiverse, one may not immediately be able to actually break through the outermost layer of reality to get inside. Some of the races, in fact, the majority of the races that we see from beyond our multiverse, such as the Viral I've mentioned before, relating to the Beta Incursion event, and a few others all meet across the way, they had to wait until those walls of realities were temporarily weakened, and in that weakened state that then allowed them to pass through inside. And in those cases, in turn, you had different reasons for either there. For some of these individuals, they ended up coming through purely by accident. It was just a happenstance of circumstances. In the case of the Viral themselves, their particular motive will end up being part of the subject of the plot of the Beta Incursion book itself, when it comes around to it. And then there is another that I won't talk about now for spoiler reasons. But for another individual beyond that, they were able to enter our multiverse with complete ease, because they are of a much higher kind of order of beings, which could be referred to as the Academy. Now, the Academy is, as you may kind of be able to ascertain from its title, a kind of scholarly body which consists of beings that have kind of transcended their own multiverses already. They have kind of this grander view and understanding of the different kinds of realities out there in the greatest cosmos on that kind of scale. In their case, they're not necessarily looking to create like a union or a federation of all the different multiverses together. They will reach out to ones that they think may be viable and may be worthy of interaction with, but for the most part they just kind of consider themselves as their own fundamental body, not like in charge or anything in the way that the entities think that they're in charge of our multiverse, but they just acknowledge that they are in a unique position of being able to operate on this much more detached scale from the rest of everything else that is going on. That being said, they will sometimes investigate other multiverses in turn, where it doesn't seem that they'll necessarily be beneficial to interact with, but they're trying to understand them in turn. This at least in terms of what we're going to come across in the books, as you might suspect, would be with our multiverse. Because ours, compared to others, has been a lot more temperamental in its history. It has undergone a lot of different changes of overall structure. Again, these noted by what we would refer to as the Big Bang. And also the fact that you have different universes spawning every time that something changes in time. I mean, the very existence of like the alpha realm and the inner region and the outer region and the beta realm, that is unusual. That is not what the majority of multiverses are like. So in many cases, ours is a unique case that the Academy are actually rather hesitant towards. But nevertheless, to try to understand what was going on here, they did once send over a single representative to go around. And what this representative did is they then identified what they thought was the most advanced or civilized society in any of our universes. This happened to be a people like the complete opposite side of the universe to everything that's going on in the books. We don't really come across them except in one instance. They have their own thing in their own pocket. They don't interact with anyone else, but they did have like the highest level of society in and of themselves. And at which point this representative basically gave them a puzzle to solve, an artifact, big obelisk monument kind of thing, and saying that if you solve this, you will be worthy of recognition from the Academy. Well, there's something inside this thing once you work out how to open it up that will be your reward. Now, as it happened, what was more there was the nature of the matter that makes up like the members of the Academy, including this representative, is in turn very unique and very traceable. So what's actually inside of this artifact, this puzzle, is a tiny nugget of this kind of matter as well. So once the society, if they ever did manage to prove themselves smart enough to open it up, advanced enough to open it up, that would expose the otherwise shielded nugget of this matter, and then the Academy externally could detect that this has happened, and that would kind of be their judge that, okay, for all that this universe is kind of chaotic and rather unstable and unappealing, it may nevertheless yield some reason to pay more attention to it. And while that society is off doing that kind of thing, the representative themselves kind of has the ability to, because of their external nature, view everything that's going on across this multiverse beyond any kind of boundaries of space and time, although under given circumstances, to again kind of have this potential to scout out the other corners of it as well as using those abilities to identify this first civilization initially. But for all of this potential for attention given by the Academy, parts of the Academy in turn really don't have an attitude that would be beneficial to us at all. Again, this is purely out of the interest of scientific curiosity, a greater understanding of existence, capital E full stop. They are trying to see if they can prove a theory called Annihilation by Insignificance. Because what we have in these cases, the different multiverses are on different scales. Like if you were to get smaller and smaller, you will potentially find other kind of realities on those smaller scales. If you were to expand yourself outwards, you would again potentially see larger orders of magnitude of reality in turn, even greater than the multiverses. But what they're thinking is, because again, they're at the point where they can perform such a thing with their technology, if a group of them keep on increasing their size, increasing their scale, would they eventually reach a point where some of the multiverses, from their relative perspective, became so small that they wouldn't even be able to register as part of their existence anymore, so that if they then shrunk themselves back down, those particular multiverses had just been wiped out full stop, because again, from a matter of perspective, everything's relative. If they were got rid of, they were annihilated because they were too insignificant to register. It was too small, even on the level of, relatively speaking, what would be subatomic particles. It just blipped out of existence because there was no way for it to continue being as it was that would still register as that. So if you keep on shrinking a picture down and down, you lose the quality in terms of the pixels until eventually, if you try to stretch it back out again to normal size, the picture is then ruined. Of course, the fact that we are still here either means that annihilation by insignificance doesn't work as a principle, it's not correct, or it just means that they haven't managed to get to a high enough order yet that that phenomenon would come into effect. Kind of on a similar note to higher orders, though, just to round off this thing. Because again, talking about things outside of the multiverse isn't something that's really going to be talked about much in terms of the Ragnarök Chronicles books, because we've already got our own multiverse to explore the different facets of and across time. We don't need to be constantly bringing in even more external factors as well. But the last thing, at least that's planned, that will be seen of the outside of our multiverse comes in the form of the house. This gets into the concepts of God. Because again, as I've said in previous videos, in a number of cases in these books, we have beings, especially the entities, who present themselves, claim to be gods. And per kind of the nature of the multiverse and reality as is stated in these videos in the books, it would seem to be very divergent from what would be presented as the explanation for reality in any kind of religion. Now, I am not a religious person myself, I am atheist, but all the same, I don't want to feel like I am alienating anyone who does have those kinds of religious beliefs. I don't want to just completely say, oh, in this reality there is no God. God, that's all wrong, right? So even though we have these other beings who seemingly have been posing as gods in our societies and forming our mythologies and pretending to fill in those roles, or otherwise they weren't actively trying to do that, but the civilizations interpreted them that way, I want there still to be the potential for some divine being on some large enough scale. And that is where, again, the Academy built the house. The house being kind of this metaphysical plane where it's a kind of mental space that one can be projected into, and it then takes the form of whatever setting would kind of make most sense to the person who's currently there, but through the windows outside of the house would then be a way to view God itself, or rather, as it's referred to in this case, is. Not that its name is, but the only way to kind of describe it is just, it is. There's no accurate other way of describing it because it is just so monumental and immense and divine. Now, for the most part, only members of the Academy, or those races on that kind of level, would have the ability to enter the house. And even in, like, there was a couple of cases where, because of the interactions with the representative that I mentioned before, a couple of humans have ended up visiting the house as well, but in that case, because we are of a lower species, we aren't as capable of conceiving of such wide grander concepts. If one of those humans was to say they appear there and the house looks like a regular Earth house, if they were to look out the windows there, they wouldn't see anything identifiable as any kind of being. They would just see some kind of bizarre landscape or whatever, because that's the best that the human mind can comprehend, is that which is outside of the house that you are meant to be looking at. Now, as for the kind of the nature of is in turn, I didn't want it to be, again, it's good, regardless, it's going to remain nebulous, the exact nature, but how I want it to be presented is that it's not an interfering God. It's not one that cares either way, good or bad, about what happens, but nevertheless, it is the force and the consciousness that brought into existence all of the individual multiverses that we now have. So it is the creator, and it is kind of aware of what goes on in all of its creation, but it doesn't care. In the same way that we as humans aren't really caring about the majority of the microbes that are in the air, all the surfaces around us. Obviously, we care about some of them because they're impactful, but for the most part, we don't even register that they're there. We know that they're there. If we wanted, we kind of had the technology where we could look at them and investigate them and even manipulate them, but for the most part, there's no reason to in our everyday lives. That is how is this God kind of considers us. It could interfere, it could make things better or worse per its own design, but it doesn't, because, like, to come back to that term, we are insignificant to it. So yeah, let's find that balance of, we have a God figure, but I don't want there to become the capacity for it just to become a divine intervention in any case. Right. So that, as I say, is what we have in terms of beyond scopes of the main setting of the Ragnarök Chronicles itself. You could argue that absolutely anything else could be going on out there in any of the other multiverses. There's any potential for diversity in those other realities in terms of what inhabits those realities, how those realities are structured in and of themselves, but I'm not looking to go into those stories myself. I actually did at one point think, because I've mentioned the Exodus alien spore, which is just what I'm referring to as given species as that's going to come around in the beta incursion, because I haven't come up with a name for them yet, because again that's way down the line and it's not my priority. But I mentioned there, the Exodus aliens, their whole thing is they were leaving our multiverse to find something else. It did occur to me at one point that I could open it up and say, okay, I've introduced this concept of the Exodus aliens. Anyone else has free reign to tell the stories of what they came across and what is in the other multiverses, or even if it's not related to the Exodus aliens. You can say, you can come up with your own stories in your own multiverses or realities and say what's happening over here, and we could just say, sure, that's canon to any of what's happening in the Ragnarök Chronicles because it is just so separated, so long as you don't then have something which is like, it then wiped out all of the multiverses, or it destroyed the multiverse of the Ragnarök Chronicles, because we don't want that, because that's the main setting. But yeah, I've talked about that before, and you know, never know if people... Ideally, people will end up being interested and caring enough about the books that I'm writing that maybe people will be interested in doing that, but obviously I'm not expecting it. We're still obviously seeing how we're going, we're just starting out, we don't know what's going to come in the future. Actually, you know what, no, I will, yeah. Just at this point, this has nothing to do with the video, but this is just a point that I like to make. When people talk about parallel universes, I will talk about how many parallel universes there could be. I would argue there cannot be infinite parallel universes, because if we're talking about infinite, then we are talking about absolutely everything that could or could not happen will have happened somewhere, whether it's conceivable or inconceivable, because there is no limit. Absolutely everything is occurring somewhere. And if that was the case, that would include a universe, a parallel universe, in which something came about that would have wiped out all of the other universes. And I've heard people argue that, no, well, something couldn't affect other universes. But no, if you're talking about infinite universes, there would be at least one eventuality where that was suddenly possible, that you could have something that would affect all other universes. So the fact that we exist, at least, either tells us that ours is the universe that, for whatever reason, prevents the existence of all other parallel universes, or there's only a finite number of parallel universes. It's not infinite, there's not scope for absolutely anything to happen. There is still limits within reasons, even if they do have their own laws of physics in some cases. Again, that number could still be absolutely inconceivable, beyond Googleplex if you want, but it couldn't be absolutely infinite. Again, so that was just a little side tag thing that I thought of when I was just mentioning the different multiverses there. Food for thought. Hope you found this video interesting. Let me know if you did in the comments or on the social medias that are linked in the description below. If you have found it interesting, try checking out some other videos on the channel as well. And either way, until I see you again, just remember to keep on telling stories.